And the chap that's joining me this morning is the country's leading motoring lawyer, and he's also a top celebrity lawyer. You may know him by his nickname. It's Nick Freeman, and he's also known as Mr. Loophole. A very hello. I was going to say a very hello to you, but just hello will do. Hi.
Hi, Angela. Hi.
Hello. Well, welcome to our programme. Nick's going to be joining us as we ease into the show with some of your favourite tunes, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me.
It's a great pleasure to have you. Now, like the Spice Girl, I mean, you don't look like a Spice Girl. I'm wondering if you were a Spice Girl, what your nickname might have been.
Probably Mr. Loophole.
Loophole Spice doesn't really roll off the tongue, does it? But you were christened by the press as Mr. Loophole because of your seemingly magical ability to secure acquittals, or as they say in the press, get people off, using legal technicalities. What's that all about? First of all, do you like the nickname?
It stuck. I trademarked it. I have to say, when I first was referred to as Mr. Loophole, I hated it because it suggested I was sort of sinister and underhand, and to be honest, I'm neither of those things. But the headlines kept on saying Mr. Loophole does this, Mr. Loophole does that, and I realised it was there to stay. And what eventually happened was a guy I know and knew won a road traffic case in Ashton Magistrates Court, and he called himself the local Mr. Loophole. And when I read that, I thought, wow, I'm not having that. I've worked very hard for this nickname that I didn't ask for. And it suddenly dawned on me the value of having a nickname, because most lawyers didn't have nicknames. Of course, there was George Carman, the great defender, and I'm not suggesting that I'm on a par with him.
But also a Manchester boy as well.
He was a Manchester boy,
yeah.
Yes. And when I heard that, I thought, right, I'm putting a stop to it. So I actually put the wheels in motion to have the nickname trademarked. And it cost a few pennies, and it took about a bit of time, but it was very worthwhile, because in fact what it did was it prevented anyone else referring to themselves as Mr. Loophole, and it's helped create a brand.
So you're like Coca-Cola. So you can say
on a smaller scale, on a smaller and less fizzy scale.
So basically, you're sort of, people say cola, but they can't say Coca-Cola. So nobody is. So in other words, when people come to you, if they have, you're a criminal defence lawyer, you do all sorts of things as well as motoring, don't you?
Well, there's a lawyer in Scotland who spoke to me before he set up, and we discussed things, and I gave him as much help and advice as possible. And he was referred to in a national newspaper as Mr. Loophole. And of course, I was very upset about this, and I spoke to him, and he was equally upset. And he actually went on major radio stations and on television and said, there is only one Mr. Loophole, and it's not me, it's Nick Freeman, and please do never refer to me to that again. Because obviously there are legal implications. And it's not a case of being threatening, but when you have a trademark, you actually actively have to protect it. So if you come across a breach of it, you are duty bound, legally bound to protect it. And if you don't do that, it can evaporate. You can lose it.
So do people come up to you in car parks in supermarkets and say, aren't you Mr. Loophole?
Well, they sometimes look and think, I know him, where do I know him from? But what is interesting is if you ask somebody in the street, who's Mr. Nick Freeman, most people won't have a clue. But if you say to somebody, do you know Mr. Loophole? Most people know Mr. Loophole, which is interesting, and I think it illustrates the point of value of having it trademarked. So
do you quite like him now, Mr. Loophole? Do you and he coexist happily together?
I wouldn't say we're comfortable bedfellows, but we've got closer over the years.
Oh, that's good to know. And of course, you're known. I mean, you've defended, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of people, thousands of people.
I used to do trials every day, probably for about 30 years.
Wow. And how many trials a week would that literally be?
Typically 5 trials a week.
All over the country?
All over the country. I lived in hotels. It was quite a tough life, 24/7, non-stop. It was like doing exams every day. As soon as you finish that trial, you're travelling and preparing for the next exam the next day. That's how it was. And
you know what we call it, because you're not from Manchester, are you?
Well, my mum's from Manchester. My mum's just down the road, Broughton Park,
right.
Salford 7, and I'm actually from Nottingham.
Right, because in Manchester we call that hard graft.
I think we call it.
Say graft.
Graft. But that's not Nottingham either. Me duck. You're right, me duck. That's Nottingham. I actually went away to boarding school. That's why.
Did you?
Yes. But of course, my accent, which used to be quite nice, has dissipated, as my friends tell me, since I've been in Manchester since 1981. It's deteriorated massively.
I'm joined this morning on Northern Air, the Hostel radio station based at North Manchester, by Nick Freeman, Mr. Loophole. We're delighted to have you here today, playing some of your favourite tunes. The Spice Girls wasn't one of yours, but we did play it because of his nickname, and also Posh Spice, of course, is married to David Beckham, who is one of your well-known clients, and we'll come to that in a moment. But we're going to have one of Nick's choices now. This is the Black Eyed Peas and I've Got a Feeling on Northern Air.
I got a feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good, good night. A feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good, good night. Tonight's the night, let's live it up. I got my money, let's spin it up. Go out and smash it, like oh my god. Jump out that sofa, let's get off.
I know that we'll have a ball if we get down and go out and just lose it all. I feel stressed out, I wanna let it go. Let's go way out, spaced out and losing all control.
Fill up my cup, Mazel tov. Look at her dancing, just take it off. Let's paint the town, we'll shut it down. Let's burn the roof,
And then we'll do it again.
let's do it, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it, and do it, and do it. Let's live it up and do it, and do it, and do it, do it, do it. Let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. Cause I got a feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good, good night. A feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good, good night. I feel tonight's the night. Hey, let's live it up.
Let's live it up.
I got my money. Hey, let's spin it up. Let's spin it up. Go out and smash it.
Smash it.
Like oh my god. Like oh my god. Jump out that sofa. Come on. Let's get off. Fill up my cup.
Drink.
Mazel tov. Look at her dancing.
Move it, move
Just
it.
take it off. Let's paint the town. Paint the town. We'll shut it down. Shut it down. Let's burn the roof.
And then we'll do it again.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. And do it. And do it. Let's live it up and do it. And do it. And do it. Do it. Do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Here we come. Here we go. We gotta rock. Easy come. Easy go. Now we on top. Feel the shot. Body rock. Rock it. Don't stop. Round and round. Up and down. Around the clock. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Saturday to Sunday. Get with us. You know what we say. Party every day, party every day, and I'm feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good, good night. I feel it. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good, good night.
The Black Eyed Peas and I've Got a Feeling, much beloved of weddings, bar mitzvahs, christenings, etc., etc. Well, you're listening to Northern Air, the 24-hour hospital radio station based at North Manchester General Hospital and beaming out to Salford Royal. And I believe if you twiddle those knobs on your computer, you'll find us on the internet as well. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by the country's top motoring lawyer, top celebrity lawyer, Nick Freeman, also known as Mr. Loophole. And that was one of your choices, I've Got a Feeling, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Why do you like that? Good tune?
It's a good tune. I love the Black Eyed Peas.
Do you?
Kids introduced me to it, and it's just it's invigorating music.
Are you one of those how old are your children?
23 and 26.
Are you one of those dads where your kids still say you got to listen to this?
They know what music I like. They can choose the music I like. So with the computers and stuff like that, Spotify, that's what it's called.
Spotify.
Spotify.
Who knew?
They'll load. They'll do it for me, so I know they'll do my playlist. That's what it is.
Absolutely. Now you've sort of become a celebrity by mixing and representing and doing a very good professional service for celebrities. I mean, just to roll some of the names off the top of your head, tell us about some of the big names. And don't be modest.
Sir Alex Ferguson, David Beckham, Ronnie O'Sullivan, Colin Montgomery. I mean, there's been lots of rock stars, lots of sports people of all sorts. But also, there are a lot of cases you've read about, and there are as many that you haven't read about. And of course, I can only talk about the ones that are in the public eye.
Absolutely.
A lot of people now, particularly now, are so concerned about trying to avoid publicity that I actually try and almost specialise in doing cases and dodging the media. That's equally important. So there are just as many really well-known cases which people just don't know about, and I can obviously never talk about them.
Absolutely. But I would say, would it be fair to say that the Alex Ferguson case probably put you on the map? You were already a very successful road traffic lawyer, but that case in particular, tell us about what happened with Sir Alex.
Well, Sir Alex was... he was stopped by the police for driving on the hard shoulder, which is an offence which only attracts 3 penalty points. But in his case, he had 9 points on his licence, so he was going to lose his licence for 6 months. But in his particular case, he had an acute stomach problem. And it was as a consequence of that stomach problem, and that was the catalyst, that was the reason why he was driving on the hard shoulder. He was trying to get to the bathroom as quickly as possible. And of course, when we discussed it, he obviously had to make a decision. Do I go through the sort of media circus and discuss my personal bathroom difficulties on that particular day, or do I just take the points and take the ban? It was actually a defence to the particular section that he was charged with, but only if he hadn't experienced the problem before. Now, he had experienced the problem earlier that day, seen a doctor, taken medication, and thought he'd recovered, and we were able to differentiate the journey there because we thought, right, he's gone there, he's recovered, he's seen someone, he thought he was cured, and then he was confronted with these terrible waves of stomach cramp on the way back and had to get to the bathroom very quickly. So we had a trial at Bury Magistrates Court, and it was a very interesting trial, and I spoke to the prosecution beforehand and we discussed various pieces of evidence. In any event, he was acquitted and he was awarded his costs. And I remember the case for 2 reasons, well, 3 reasons. One, he was one of my first really big clients. It was also, sadly, the day of the Selby rail disaster. And thirdly, I was doing a charity do for Wheatsoe, a charity, a few weeks ago. And a gentleman came up to me and he asked me if I'd sign the book, and he said, "Can you please sign it at chapter 4?" This
is your book, The Art of the Loophole,
yes,
which came out a few years ago.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
And I said, "Of course I'll sign it." And he said, do you not want to know why I'm going to ask you to sign it at chapter 4? And it's headed in sickness and in health. And I thought, oh goodness me, poor guy's obviously very ill. No, I won't ask. I'll just sign it for you. So about 15 minutes later, he came back to me and said, "You've not asked me why I signed it I've asked you to sign it at chapter 4. I said, "All right, go on, tell me why." He said, "Well, I was the magistrate who actually dealt with that trial."
No way.
And I was absolutely shocked. I said, "You should have told me. I'd have given you a special commendation in the book." And he said, "Well, when you did Ronnie O'Sullivan, the magistrate got sacked. When you did David Beckham's case, he got a real hard time too." So he was acutely relieved when he read the book to realise that actually I hadn't referred to him in any disparaging terms.
Well, the Emperor Tiberius of ancient Rome had a catchphrase, which was, "Let them hate me as long as they fear me." Would you say that's your kind of modus operandi when you go into court?
I try and do the job as nicely and as decently as I can. The inevitable consequence of an adversarial system is that people are going to prejudge you, and they're going to find it probably unpleasant and uncomfortable.
When you say an adversarial, just
well,
for
an
those of us that
adversarial,
aren't
I mean,
qualified lawyers.
Well, what that means is it's a fight.
Right.
It's a fight. It's not. It's in many countries in Europe we have what's called an inquisitorial, where we're just searching for truth and justice, and you might think that actually is a better thing. But here, really, you've got a very smart prosecutor who's doing his job on behalf of the police and the Crown, and that I used to work as a prosecutor, and then you've got the defence lawyers who are actually defending, and they'll be acting on their client's instructions, and they'll also be looking at what the prosecution are doing and making sure they're doing their job properly. Many of the cases that I've done have not been as a result of my client's instructions. They've been as a result, unfortunately, of catastrophic errors by the police and or the prosecution. And I've taken them to task about it, and that's why these cases have been lost. So, yeah, people might dislike me or hate me for it, but all I'm actually doing is doing my job, and there is a presumption of innocence. And I always say to people who sort of say to me, "How do you sleep at night?" Well, I've just done my job. Why don't you ask the police or the prosecution who actually has made the mistake which has resulted in this particular acquittal? And no one ever seems to want to do that. They just want it. I'm an easy figure of blame, and I take it, and it's part of the territory, and I don't have a problem with it.
Do you have, so obviously you're working within the parameters of the law, and if the law says that if a case is defective because a certain type of paperwork hasn't been filled in or whatever, then that's the prosecution's fault. Do you have a moral issue with any of the stuff that you do?
Well, you try and put your morality on one side. The moral issue in a court of law is you're doing the best for your client within the confines of those rules. I don't think you can let morality and emotions get in the way, because if you do that, you compromise actually what you do. And I had one particular case. It was a high-profile case, a well-known television star who was charged with drink driving, and the prosecutor had been very helpful to me during the course of a trial, and it wasn't a one-day trial. It went on for several days, and he'd missed a crucial piece of evidence in his case, which would have resulted in the acquittal. And because he'd been so decent to me, I felt compelled to help him. And I said to him, to be fair, to a stage where I didn't think he could rectify it, you do realise you've forgotten to say A, B and C. And what he did was he then applied to the judge to reopen and to adduce that evidence. And I opposed it. And the judge says, no, I'll let him in. And my client was convicted.
Because you'd essentially helped the prosecutor.
Because that case will go with me to my grave. Obviously, I can't divulge the name of the client.
Go on.
But I feel ashamed of myself. And it's something that still makes me feel really uncomfortable, because I allowed, if you like, the non-legal morality to get in the way. And it has no place in the courtroom. You're there to do your job, to assist your client within the rules of the game. That's what you do. And I'd allowed my own personal feelings to contaminate my client's case. And it was a terrible thing to do.
There you go. We've got a scoop. Mr. Loophole is human after all. It must have been a
There's
difficult one.
There's a song about that, isn't there? I'm human after all. It's right.
Not sure if it's on our list, but we can ask our musical maestros pushing all the buttons here to find out later. You're listening to Northern Air, the 24-hour hospital radio station based at North Manchester General Hospital. And I'm with Nick Freeman here, and this is The Streets of London, Ralph McTell.
Have you seen the old man in the closed down market, kicking up the papers with his worn out shoes? In his eyes you see no pride, and held loosely at his side yesterday's paper, telling yesterday's news. So how can you tell me you're lonely, and it's sad for you that the sun don't shine? Oh, let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something to make you change your mind. And have you seen the old girl who walks the streets of London, dirt in her hair and her clothes in rags? She's no time for talking, she just keeps right on walking, carrying her home in 2 carrier bags. So how can you tell me you're lonely, when it's safe for you that the sun don't shine? Well, let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something to make you change your mind. in that cafe at 11:15. Same old man sitting there on his own, looking at the world over the rim of his teacup, and each tea lesson on, and he wanders home alone. So how can you tell me that you're lonely? It's safe for you that the sun don't shine. Or let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something to make you change your mind. Have you seen the old man outside the seaman's mission? Memory fading with the metal ribbons that he wears. And in our winter city, the rain cries a little pity for one more forgotten hero and a world that doesn't care. So how can you tell me that you're lonely? It's safe for you that the sun don't shine. Or let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something to make you change your mind.
Oh, the beautiful sounds of Ralph McTell and his 1974 hit Streets of London. And I'm joined today by Nick Freeman, the top celebrity and motoring lawyer, otherwise known as Mr. Loophole. Guess what number that hit peaked at? That's one of your favourites, isn't it?
I hope number one.
Well, interestingly enough, it was number 2.
Oh, was it really?
What were they thinking in 1974? Maybe that
There was
when...
so much quality music.
Do you think that's what it is? Do you think you've seen a decline?
That's the barometer of the quality of music. If a song like that, of that quality, can only get to number 2.
I know.
What was number 1?
Well, it's not in my notes. It's not in my notes, so I don't know. I've just been caught out by Mr. Loophole.
Sorry, that was below the belt. I apologise.
That's okay. That's okay. We've got the police on speed dial here. So I'm joined, as I said, by Mr. Loophole, top celebrity and motoring lawyer. And obviously you have made a massive name in law. I mean, you've been described as the country's leading high-profile lawyer. You are the bane of the police and the prosecution service. You are the go-to man that all the celebs and lots of ordinary people have on speed dial when they have a motoring offence or any sort of criminal defence. But where does it all come from? I mean, I read in your book that actually you were told, rather your parents were advised, that maybe law was not the subject for you, that you were not bright enough to be a lawyer.
Yeah, well, I didn't...
Hello to Nick's teachers.
Yes, yeah. Obviously, careers advice at Uppingham School wasn't high on the list. I was in the same classroom as Stephen Fry, and we were in the fast stream. And I had to work very, very hard to keep up with everybody else.
What was he like as a boy?
Exactly as he is now.
Really?
He's just enormously
Fruity.
Talented, gifted. It hasn't changed. I mean, I don't know him personally now, but he sat at the desk in front of me.
Wow.
For 2 years. And he was a brilliant, his vocabulary, because he used to go to bed, I didn't know this at the time, and read. That's all he used to do. He used to read. He wasn't sporty.
Yeah.
But he was
well, lots of schoolboys read before going to bed, but I don't think it does much with their vocabulary.
He did it all night, apparently. But in any event, so I didn't. My parents told me years later, when I was already fairly successful, that when I'd been at boarding school, they'd received some advice to say, "Don't let him be a lawyer. He's not bright enough." And obviously I didn't know that, and my father wanted me to be a lawyer. That's what I wanted to actually be a professional golfer, but he encouraged. So
he didn't tell you what they told him?
No, not at the time. Oh no, not at all.
Good for him.
No, not
Good
at
for
all.
him.
And no, he obviously had his faith in me, didn't he?
Yeah, wonderful. It's a whole different conversation.
So I wanted to be a professional golfer, and maybe he thought if he told me that, thinking of my dad, he'd have probably realised I'd have used that as an excuse to actually be a golfer and not a lawyer.
Right.
So there might have been some method in his madness.
But it wasn't, I mean, would it be fair to say, and you've written about this extensively, it wasn't an easy fit. It comes back to that word we used before, graft, as you said.
Hard work.
graft.
Well, I think anyone who's successful at anything, whether it's work, sports, whatever you do, to try and be as good as you're going to be, you have to work incredibly hard. There aren't any shortcuts. If you're gifted, or if you're incredibly gifted, then it's probably easier. But you have to know things that other people don't know, and you only do that acquire that knowledge by taking books on holiday and sitting there reading, being interesting. Because for me, learning about points of law, it's like ammunition. It's something that I can hit a prosecutor over the head with. So if knowing the significance of a word void, for example, instead of voided, it saved a man from going to prison. He'd had 4 drink driving convictions. He hadn't got any defence at all. I'd looked at the papers. I'd told him he got no defence. He insisted that I went to court and argued. And I actually spoke to the Law Society to ask them whether I'm allowed to do that, take money, because he had no defence, and I was concerned about my credibility. But the point is, I was taking the witness, the police officer, through his evidence, and I asked him, well, what happened when the defendant blew? I was just fishing. And he said that the VDU on the machine displayed the word void. And I said, well, can you spell that, police officer? And he said, VOID, looking at me like I'd taken leave of my senses. And I said, no more questions, and sat down, and that was the end of my case. And then I stood up and made a closing speech, and I said, the officers told us that this machine wasn't working, and therefore my client's entitled to be acquitted. And everybody looked at me. They hadn't got a clue. And I went on to say, if he'd said voided, that would have meant that the defendant had provided insufficient quantities of breath. But he said void. That is the evidence before you. Now, they adjourned the case for several weeks for an expert to consider the evidence, and the expert considered it and confirmed that if the officer had said void, that meant the machine wasn't working. The point I'm making is, I only knew that because I took textbooks with me on holiday, and I read it and I retained it. And 2-3 years later, I remember, void. Wow, thank you very much. It was there. Now, if you hadn't read it, if you weren't interested in acquiring that knowledge, that guy would have gone to prison.
You took textbooks on holiday. Sorry, but as a woman, I'm thinking of the luggage allowance that you get.
Well,
I'm thinking that's valuable shoe space that you're taking.
That's something that doesn't really bother me. First of all, I don't fly. I hate flying. And secondly,
why is that?
I get terrible travel sickness, absolutely horrendous. It's sick in the train, the car, almost sick in the bath. It's terrible. So I drive.
Sick where?
In the bath, not the bath, the bath.
Why would you? Where are you going in your bath?
No, I'm joking. I get terrible. I get terrible travel sickness.
Right.
And I don't really take holidays. I have a house in France. And when I go there, I work. And so they used to ship, I used to take a carload of stuff with me, and they'd used to ship boxes of files down with me.
Fascinating.
I enjoy it. It's, if you are, you're working, you're running your own business, and I didn't have really much support then in terms of other staff. I was trying to do everything, and I was, in court most of the time. So this is what I was doing, and that's how you acquire the knowledge.
But this, the reason I mentioned the story about being told at parents' evening, and teachers, can't they could do terrible damage when they sort of make these prophecies about children based on the term's work. But clearly you confounded your detractors at school and have become a successful lawyer. But the genesis, the birth of Mr. Loophole, it happened at a particular case, didn't it, at Altrincham Magistrates Court?
Yeah, it did. I was actually prosecuting for the police. I'd probably been doing it for a little under a year, and I was quite confident, cocky. I was confident. I was doing a drink driving trial with a well-seasoned solicitor in Altrincham Magistrates Court. It was the old police station in those days. I think it's now apartments. And I remember the case was straightforward. The guy was driving, he was put on the machine, he was over the limit, and I sat down at half-time, closed my case, sort of mulling over what I was going to have to lunch, whether I was going to M&S or whether I was going to the officers' mess, And I remember this lawyer, his name was John Goodman, and he came up to me recently, actually, at a funeral to remind me of this story, not that I needed reminding. And I remember hearing him start off, I have a submission of no case to make. And I remember this sort of, I immediately picked up no case. Within 30 seconds, what I hadn't done was I hadn't submitted the printout from the machine which prove that the machine was working. Now, you either prove the machine's working by the officer giving not only evidence of the readings, but the parameters, the calibration range of the machine, which I didn't know you had to do, or you hand in the printout, which has all this on, and the evidence is there. I did neither of those things. All I did was adduce the level of the reading, which was in excess of the prescribed limit. And within 30 seconds, he'd made his point. And I remember that sinking feeling, that cold sweat that bathes your body. And there was nothing I could do. That was it, finished. And the case was lost. I felt sick. It didn't leave me for a long, long time. And I sort of promised myself, no one's ever going to do that to me again. And I made it my business that I would know this law inside out, backwards, etc., etc. And to the extent that I knew within 3 months of starting to prosecute, I'd been approached by a well-known criminal practice who'd asked me to join them, but I was on a contract for 2 years. But at my last weekend, I went into the police law library and I wrote out in longhand every drink driving case I could find, because I realised the value of that knowledge, and I knew that you need to know that subject really well. And in those days, I prosecuted from 81 to 83. In 83, 84, if you knew the law, you could not lose a drink driving case because it was impossible for the police. They had so many hoops to jump through. It was impossible for them. But unfortunately, most people just told their clients they weren't interested in road traffic. Road traffic was almost a dirty word. Even the prosecution didn't like to touch it because it was sort of full of complexities. So as a punishment in the afternoon, I'd be sent to Bolton to do the road traffic work because no one wanted to touch it. So that taught me a lesson, and it probably set me off on the way to becoming Mr. Loophole.
So there you go. Tell your kids, work hard and you'll do well. This is Angela Epstein with Nick Freeman on Northern Air, the Hostel radio station.
Frightened of dying. Any time will do. I don't mind. Why should I be frightened of dying? No reason for it. You've got to do something.
from Pink Floyd's seminal album Dark Side of the Moon, and that was The Great Gig in the Sky. You're a bit of a Floydette, aren't you, Nick?
I love that album. I think it's one of the most influential albums that there has ever been. It's influenced more people than any other album. It's probably my age group, my generation. But it was summer of 1976. I've just bought my first car, a little red Triumph Herald convertible for £520, and it was a heat wave. And I think I was doing my first year law exams, and after I'd finished the exams, it was incredibly hot. And I remember driving around with that music playing in the car, Dark Side of the Moon playing in the car, and it's still a haunting sound. It's an amazing song, amazing album.
So you like driving, obviously, you don't fly anywhere. Does that help inform your work at all, do you think?
Yeah, of course, yeah, absolutely.
How does that work?
I think when you're, whether you're out running, walking the dog, sitting in your car, you lying in bed, sleeping at night, your brain is thinking all the time how you're going to, you've got a client, you've got a trial the next day, you're trying to find something that's going to give you the edge. So you don't stop thinking. And, hopefully you get that sort of almost eureka moment with that case. Or it might be something that crops up in during the case. I mean, for example, I can tell you about a very straightforward factual case. A chap was supposed to have reversed his car at 3 o'clock in the morning in the Stockport area, and he said he was asleep in the car and he hadn't moved it. So it was an officer saying he'd moved it, and he said, I was just asleep in the car. 3 o'clock in the morning, no witnesses. And it was a trial for quite a well-known person. His father was a well-known chap. And I was watching the officer give his evidence, and he seemed to have something in his mouth, and he was chewing. And it's just discourteous. And no one seemed to have picked it up. And I obviously look very attentively when I'm cross-examining someone, or I'm about to, because I'm looking at how to approach them. So I thought, well, I'm going to kick off with, officer, have you got something in your mouth?
Well, even though it's got nothing. What a bizarre way to start.
Well, I know, but I thought, well, okay, I'm going to what I wanted to do was demonstrate to the court, here's a guy giving evidence on oath, and he's being discourteous. He's not going to score brownie points. I thought, yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Freeman, I apologise, I'll get rid of it. But what he said, bizarrely, was, no, I'm not chewing anything. So I said, officer, well, what's in your mouth? Well, it's medicinal. Okay. So when you said you weren't chewing something, that was a lie, was it, on oath, officer? Well, yes. And you say it's medicinal. What exactly are you chewing? Well, it's airwaves. Right. So that's not medicinal either, is it? No. So that's another lie, isn't it? Thank you. Well, within 30 seconds, that officer's credibility was shot. My client was acquitted, and he was awarded costs out of central funds. Now, you might say that's got nothing to do with the case, but just think of it for one moment.
I would.
The Crown have got to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. There is a presumption of innocence, and if you've got an officer who is prepared on oath to just tell total lies 15 feet away from the magistrates, how can you then say, I'm quite confident and I'm sure beyond reasonable doubt that I accept his account that this car moved wherever he says it did at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the defendant says, no, actually I was asleep? How can you be sure? And the court obviously said, we can't possibly be sure. This man is a proven liar. Thank you very much. The guy's acquitted. And that's justice. But that also shows what this job is about. It's not just about knowing the law. It's about understanding people, watching people, interacting, and picking up on things, their body language. In this particular case, it was chewing. There was another chap that I met.
Sorry, I'm still reeling about the idea.
Very briefly. My client was a diminutive lady client, who actually had been acquitted 4 times for drink driving with me, but she was supposed to have floored this officer by kicking him in her high heels, a long dress, and she was supposed to have floored him. And he was standing in the dock, and I was looking at him, and I just took a fly with him. I said, officer, how long have you been doing martial arts for? And he looked at me and said, how do you know that? I said, officer, just answer the question, will you please? And as it happened, he'd been doing it for a long time. I said, you're rather accomplished, aren't you? What Dan are you? And he was a black belt 4th Dan, which, means, you've got a killer there. And I said, so what you're saying is that this drunken lady in her high heels was able to knock you to the ground. And, he came up to me afterwards, and I was preparing for the afternoon session. The door opened and he walked in, and I thought he was going to hit me. And he reached out with his arm to congratulate me and just said, how did you know that? And it was just looking at him. There was something about his poise, that made me think this guy is martial arts. That's what he does. And I was right. So there's all sorts of different aspects to the job.
It's absolutely, I'm absolutely fascinated that a packet of Orbit and a pair of stilettos and you could be on the wrong side of Mr. Loophole. I mean, that seems to be how it works.
Well, I had one officer actually believe that I hypnotised him in court. I asked him to read the time from his notebook and he got into a fluster, and I said, calm down, put your notebook down. Calm down, listen to the question. I asked him the question again, what time did you first see my client? And 3 or 4 times he got the time wrong. And then the judge said, look, officer, Mr. Freeman's asking you a question. All we want is, what time did you first see this particular car? And he collapsed. He couldn't deal with it. And he came up to me afterwards. He actually said to the judge in court, on oath, that Mr. Freeman's hypnotised me, sir.
Had you?
I wish I knew how.
3, 2, 1, you're back in the room.
In any case, he seriously believed it, which is quite frightening.
You could have a whole new nickname instead of the Mr. Loophole. We could do something like, you could be the new Paul Daniels.
I can't afford another trademark fee.
I'm joined by Nick Freeman, the celebrity lawyer, top motoring lawyer here at Northern Air, the hospital radio, based at North Manchester General Hospital. We're going to ease away now with a bit of Roberta.
First time ever I saw your face, I thought the sun rose in your eyes, and the moon and the stars were the gifts you gave to the dark and the endless skies, my love, to the dark and the endless skies. And the first ever I kissed your mouth, I felt the earth move in my hand, like the trembling heart of a captive bird that was there at my command, my love, that was there at my command. and I knew our joy would fill the earth and last till the end of time, my love, and it would last till the end of time, my love. The first time ever I saw your face, your face, your face, your face.
This is Northern Air, the hospital radio station based at North Manchester General Hospital and beaming out to Salford Royal as well. Thank you so much for your company. We're here 24 hours a day and on the internet. And I'm sorry you're having to listen to us in hospital, but I hope we're doing something to make your stay, along with the lovely staff, a little bit more comfortable. And I'm joined today by top celebrity lawyer, top motoring lawyer, the man they call Mr. Loophole, Nick Freeman. You love that record, don't you?
Beautiful song. Stunning.
Why do you
Brings
like
back
it so
very
much?
happy memories.
Anything in particular?
Yes. I came to Manchester in 1981, and very shortly after I arrived in Manchester, I was invited to a party, and I was introduced to a couple, and the gentleman part of the couple he left the party early, and the female part came over and said, "My partner's left." And she said, "Shall we go and walk in the garden?" The party was held in the most magnificent garden, and we sort of went off for a walk, and we returned some time later, and it was a very memorable evening.
I say, you cad. You cad.
To rippled applause, if I remember correctly.
Men are such beasts and so predictable. Don't you think, ladies? There's just been a stampede out of various wards now. They're all switching over to the
Sorry,
shipping
but
forecast.
that song was played as we walked down the garden.
Oh, it's like one of those films on the afternoon on Channel 4, or Channel 5 rather. And guess what height that record reached in the charts?
Number 4.
No, believe it or not, it was 14 back in May
Well,
1972.
obviously, at this time, in my youth, the quality of music was absolutely amazing, and that's why these stunning records didn't get to number 1, because there were other stunning records that got that.
Yep. Sorry about that, Roberta Spice.
No
Now-
electric music apart from Tubular Bells, of course.
Electric, of course. Now, as a lawyer, you're obviously absolutely up to speed, excuse the pun, on the statute, the intricacies of the statute. That's exactly why you're so good at what you do, because you recognise the technicalities that others don't bother to look for or acknowledge. But are there aspects of the law that you think are very much lacking, certainly in the area of motoring law? Anything in particular? I mean, we have a massive issue with people using their mobile phones at the moment.
Well, I think the government are tinkering with the problem in relation to mobile phones, and we're drawing a distinction between holding them handheld and hand-free. And in my view, there shouldn't be a distinction, because if you're using your phone, you're holding it or it's hands-free, it's equally dangerous. It's the same level of distraction, and that level of distraction actually equates to the same level as if you're drunk behind the wheel.
Really?
It does. They've done a massive amount of research with this. The reaction time is 30% less, and you are 4 times more likely to have an accident. And in my view, it's incongruous to suggest that if you are convicted of drink driving, you will be disqualified for a minimum period of 12 months. But if you're convicted of illegal use of a mobile phone, they've just increased the points just over a year ago, from 3 to 6. There are no police enforcing it. You see people using their phone all the time, and they have no idea how dangerous it is. And the problem is this. There are many problems. And in my view, first of all, there needs to be parity. What we need to do is we need a sentence which would police itself. And I would suggest to the government that they introduce a level of disqualification which is exactly the same as drink driving, and that in itself would deter people. And I think people then...
What would that be then? What, in simple terms?
A 12-month period of disqualification for
a ban.
Using your mobile phone. I think that sounds harsh, but it equates perfectly to the level of danger posed, the level of distraction, the slowness in the reaction time. And I think people would sit up and think, actually, I'm not going to take that chance. I cannot afford to be off the road. We need to socially stigmatise the problem. We haven't touched the problem yet. It's that there's no peer group pressure. Drink driving now is stigmatised. There are people who still do it, but by and large, a lot of people have now stopped. It's not socially acceptable. As far as phones are concerned, everyone thinks it's okay. And there's another problem with phones. I refer to this distinction that we have. So you have someone who's driving along, hands-free, thinking, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm not breaking the law, and someone steps out in front of you and tragically you kill or cause that person serious injury. The fact that you were legally using your phone will now become illegal, and you will then be investigated for either causing death by dangerous driving or causing serious injury by dangerous driving, and you're looking at a maximum sentence of 14 years. So people are totally oblivious to the potential dangers of legally using your phone, because that the legality behind it can be lost immediately if it adversely affects your driving or if you are involved in an incident. And the government haven't conveyed this message over to the drivers. And as I say, there aren't sufficient police out there enforcing it. So we have a problem at the moment that people use their phones willy-nilly. They're not getting caught. And I think there was very recently the police had a crackdown and they caught 2,000 people in a week doing it. And yet over a period of a year they said, well, the figures have dropped because there are only 26,000 people illegally using their phone, which of course is a totally false figure, and all that does is reflect the fall in the number of police actually on the roads catching people illegally using their phone.
So you're saying that if somebody, it's almost like having a pint of beer next to them in the car.
Yeah,
if
if they imagine, instead of sticking their phone to their ear, it's a pint of beer, it might make them sit up and think, actually, I shouldn't be doing this.
That would be a very powerful image. You're saying that they need something like the old Clunk Click advertising campaign that really makes people understand.
Yeah, well, I can remember quite vividly that body going through and smashing the screen, and it hit home. It made you think about it. And we need something strong that's going to actually hit home with people, and the penalty doesn't touch it. Of course, drink driving, you're disqualified. 6 points. Well, people with a clean license, they're going to take the chance at knowing that there are no police out there. So we need something, as I say, we need a sentence that makes sense. The current sentence does not make sense. Couple that with the fact that you're not likely to get caught. What are people going to do? They're going to carry on doing it.
And yet you've obviously defended many people, celebrities, using their phone. I mean, very famously, you defended Jimmy Carr for using his mobile phone.
I did. He was recording a joke, and if you look at the legislation, the illegal use of a mobile phone, of course, relates to an interactive communication. And it shouldn't do, because of course he was engrossed with his phone, he was engrossed with the joke that he was recording, but it didn't fall foul of the legislation, and yet there was that level of distraction. But unfortunately the legislation, unfortunately for safety and road users, the legislation doesn't touch the problem, and it needs to be changed. It needs to address the problem at hand. It needs to deal with it properly. And I know it's not a vote winner, and that's why politicians, unfortunately, are disingenuous, because they won't deal with it, because they know it won't be popular. But they ought to prioritise road safety. They ought to get a grip and do something that will actually stop people using their mobile phones, because their message at the moment isn't hitting home.
Maybe you should be a politician, Nick.
I don't think that's for me, but I'm quite happy to highlight areas where politicians can, if you like, up the ante. And this is certainly an area. There are many fatalities each year because of illegal use of mobile phones, and it's something that could easily be avoided with the right penalty and the right policing. I'm joined by Nick Freeman, the celebrity lawyer and top motoring lawyer here at Hospital Radio.
based at North Manchester General Hospital. Remember, we're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and on the internet as well. And I've been delighted that Nick Freeman, celebrity lawyer, top motoring lawyer, the man they call Mr. Loophole, has joined me over the last hour for an absolutely fascinating, very quick journey. I was going to say a speedy journey, but that would be unlawful, wouldn't it?
Time flies when you're enjoying yourself. Doesn't it?
Will you come again?
Yeah, no, we'll come again. I enjoyed it.
Listening to some lovely tunes as well that you've chosen for us, Nick, which we're very grateful for. Remember that even though we're here all the time, I do mean this in the most sincere way, that you won't be to listen, because you'll be out of hospital, back on your feet and on the road to recovery. We're going to finish with one of your all-time favourite tunes, Nick. Tell us about this one.
John Denver and his song. The first time I drove down to the south of France, I was 18. 7 of us drove down in a van. I remember the whole holiday cost £200.
Wow.
And this was a song that was in the charts, and it was played all the time. We played it on the car on the way down and while we were down there. And it's a hauntingly beautiful song.
It is a beautiful kind of road track. Do you have a favourite song when you're going on the way to a trial? Do you like to listen?
It depends
to
what mood I'm in, what sort of trial it is.
Okay.
It all depends on the mood.
You've got a top flight A-list celebrity trial, okay? Everything's riding on it.
I might just, to be quite honest with you, have no music on and just be thinking about the case and how I'm going to deal with it. I often try and go into the zone.
Right, so you're not sort of headbanging to
No,
status
definitely
quo.
no. Hopefully on the way back.
Winner!
But concentrating at the same time.
Yeah, we are the champions. There's probably all sorts of things. Anyway, it's been a great pleasure to have you. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you for inviting me.
Very much hope you'll come again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You fill up my senses like a night in a forest, like the mountains in springtime, like a walk in the rain, like a storm in the desert, like a sleepy blue ocean. You fill up my senses, come fill me again. Come, let me love you, let me give my life to you. Let me drown in your laughter, let me die in your arms. Let me lay down beside you, let me always be with you. Come, let me love you, come love me again. Like a night in a forest, like the mountains in springtime, like a walk in the rain, like a storm in the desert, like a sleepy blue ocean. You fill up my senses, come fill me again.